This is Talking Foreign Policy, an internationalist perspective on Canada's role abroad. And today we're going to be talking about developments in the NATO proxy war. In this weekend's Globe and Mail, there's a story about 3 Canadians that have been killed fighting in Ukraine over the past 10 days. The story talks about whether this suggests that fighting is actually escalating. Also, yesterday, Friday, the Trudeau government announced a new shipment in weapons to be donated to Ukraine. I think about $60 million they announced. And in recent days, there's been a lot of discussion in the media. The Trudeau government has been harping on, criticizing the Conservatives for not having voted for a Canada-Ukraine free trade agreement that's been in negotiations for many, many years. And the Trudeau government is sort of suggesting that the Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives, that they are sort of waffling in their support for Ukraine, kind of following in the MAGA Donald Trump kind of direction of questioning some elements of NATO support for Ukraine. To talk about this, we have the good fortune to have University of Ottawa professor Ivan Katchanovski on. He is an expert, a Canadian of Ukrainian descent. He is an expert on Ukrainian politics. So first of all, Ivan, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for the invitation.
And my first question is just a little bit about, how do you see, there's a lot of discussion about this free trade agreement, this media, but this idea that the Trudeau government is saying that the Conservatives are not sufficiently supportive of Ukraine. What do you make of that sort of politicizing this question?
I think this is just an issue of politics and partisan politics. As far as I know, and I'm not expert in the issue of Canadian politics, but as far as I know, traditionally Ukrainian diaspora in Canada tended to support conservatives because they were based in provinces like Alberta, which is traditionally a kind of more conservative province, and so on. And this is, I think, again, I don't think that this is kind of basically a shift in Canadian politics. And if there would be a new conservative-led government or conservative government, I think they would likely to continue the same policy, maybe with some changes, like this difference between Republicans and Democrats on this issue kind of is becoming significant in the United States. But I think in Canada it would be less significant because of very important vote from Ukrainian diaspora, which has much more bigger implication and much bigger impact on Canadian politics.
Yeah, that's my sense as well. One of the things I find interesting in all the framing of the Liberals criticizing the Conservatives on that is that they're saying that they're not supporting Ukraine. Now, there was Zelensky's advisor, the person who headed up the Ukrainian delegation in the first weeks of the war, where Ukraine and Russia had talks. And he came out publicly and made some pretty, he really confirmed what a lot of people have been saying about those negotiations, that they centered around Russia's demand for neutrality, i.e. that Ukraine wouldn't join NATO. And he also alluded to the fact that Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, scuttled those negotiations. So this whole idea of Canada supporting Ukraine, I think sometimes that's a very politicized definition of supporting. You can make a good case that supporting those peace negotiations back in March of 2022 may have saved tens of thousands of lives. But can you just explain a bit of what was said, who this individual is, and the sort of broader political implications?
Yes, I think if I can comment briefly also on the issue which you raised about supporting Ukraine. Before the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, I gave an interview to CTV, a major Canadian television channel, in which I discussed this real possibility of the war and Canadian policy, what Canada should do And the question was asked to me how Canada can support Ukraine. And the issue was, again, the only issue which was discussed then and which is now discussed as well without any changes. It was if Canada should supply weapons to Ukraine and how much weapons Canada should supply to Ukraine. And I responded that I think that real support for Ukraine would be in the form of supporting, preventing such a war. And if the war already started, I think the real kind of support, not only from Canada, but also from other countries and from politicians and from people who say that they support Ukraine and interested in Ukraine, would be just to kind of to have peaceful resolution of this conflict. And this is, I think, a very important revelation, which was, or confirmation, which was made publicly by the close advisor, close person, a politician and government official who is very close to Zelenskyy and a member of his inner circle. And his name is David Arakhamia. He's originally from Georgia, Republic of Georgia, and he became, I think he was DJ in the United States briefly or something before he went into politics and became elected after Zelenskyy became president of Ukraine. So David Arakhamia said in his interview to Ukrainian television, a very popular television channel, which was owned by Kolomoisky, and in which Zelenskyy used to get his kind of public television shows, comedy shows, and later this very famous film. So this politician who now became head of parliament, head of Zelenskyy party faction in the Ukrainian parliament, and also who was the head of the Ukrainian delegation during the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine in Belarus and then in Turkey. So he's, I think, a very important person, very close to Zelenskyy, and he was the one who was leading these peace talks. So he's a person who knows everything what happened there. And he said publicly what I think very important public acknowledgement, which was shocking to many Ukrainians. He said that basically there was a possibility to end this war again in spring of 2022 if Ukraine, or Zelenskyy in this case, were to agree for Ukraine to become a neutral country, basically not joining NATO. And he said this was main demand or key demand from Russia, from a Russian delegation during this peace talks. And he said that Russia also demanded other conditions were making Russian language, again, status about Russian language, and they mentioned so-called denazification in Ukraine. But he said the main issue was NATO membership of Ukraine and or neutrality of Ukraine. And this could have led to the end of the war. And I think, and he also mentioned, very important, again, confirmation, he mentioned that also these discussions, which were, again, between Russian and Ukrainian delegation, were closely followed by Western countries. So they received all the information about peace talks. And they knew everything. They received draft documents from these peace talks. And he said that after this Ukrainian delegation, which he headed, came back from Turkey to Ukraine, he said there was a visit from Boris Johnson, then British Prime Minister, and he came to Ukraine and told them that, again, we would not sign any agreements with Russia, and we need to continue, and it's necessary to continue fighting. So basically, kind of this was acknowledgement that there was a real possibility of peace agreement. Again, about 1 month after the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which could have ended this war and prevented a lot of casualties, again, tens of thousands of Ukrainian military casualties, many civilian casualties. I think now about 10,000 confirmed casualties in Ukraine war, civilian casualties confirmed by the United Nations. And this also would have avoided devastation of Ukraine, economic devastation. And now I think this would mean also that, and he acknowledged this also publicly, he acknowledged that Ukraine now not in position to again start negotiations with Russia or to resume negotiations with Russia, because positions of Ukraine is now much worse than it was before. So it's, and this is again just a recognition of the failure. Basically, this is quite unbelievable, because this is a recognition, public admission of the major failure major folly on behalf of Zelenskyy, but also on behalf of Western countries, because he also said that the Western countries said that they would not accept or they would not sign any security guarantees for Ukraine if Ukraine were to agree for neutrality and not joining NATO. And so this is quite, I think, very significant confirmation. But this information was already publicly known. It was published in Ukrainian media in May of 2022, and I was I think I was the first who posted this on Twitter in English, in English language translation of this article, which I did from Ukrainian, and this again became viral. And afterwards, there was confirmation from Israeli Prime Minister, but also confirmation from German leader of Germany, but also Putin said the same, and former senior officials in the U.S. administration also said the same, according to article by Fiona Hill in Foreign Affairs magazine. And in addition to this, confirmation, basically, or admission, public admission by head of this delegation at peace talks on behalf of Ukraine, actually that this peace deal was basically kind of blocked by or delayed or kind of stopped by Boris Johnson, also confirms that that Ukraine is basically a proxy state, or a client state of the United States and the United Kingdom, because Boris Johnson was not only giving his own message, he was basically speaking on behalf of entire West, which means basically United States-led message to Zelenskyy, and that this again this decision, which is, I think, has catastrophic consequences to Ukraine and very negative consequences to Ukraine and Ukrainians, was made without any kind of public discussion. There was no, and there were public denials that this actually even happened for a very long time. Only now they admit this publicly. Even so, there was such confirmation. And again, and mainstream media almost never reported this in the West. There were no major news media which reported this revelation, including a latest confirmation by again the head of Ukrainian delegation, who is now also head of the parliamentary faction of the Zelenskyy party in the Ukrainian parliament. But in addition to this, I think also very important, he also suggested in this interview, apparently he said that, again, based on his content of his message, that he said that he actually claims that this was a successful decision on behalf of him and his negotiation team, because they made basically Russians to leave, that Russians went basically, and this I think actually refers to the fact of a Russian withdrawal of the military forces from the Kiev area. And this is, I think, would also confirm basically a statement by Putin, who said that there was negotiation. During the negotiations, there was agreement, basically a provisional agreement to kind of about framework of this peace deal, and as a part of this agreement, Russian forces withdrew from Kiev. And I think this is, I think, major implication, because in the media and by a lot of this military, even military experts and so on, by politicians in Ukraine, in the West, this was presented or misrepresented as a kind of as a result of military defeat of Russian forces near Kiev. Even so, I was researching this as I do all other major kind of fighting in Ukraine each day, and I did not see any such evidence. And I wrote in my study that this was actually a withdrawal of Russian forces and not a result of again military defeat. Even so, there was resistance, significant resistance by Ukrainian forces, but there was no defeat. And I think this is has major implications, because this was used to sell this idea, this withdrawal of Russian forces, which was misrepresented as defeat of Russian forces, was used to sell ideas that Ukraine can defeat Russia militarily, that basically Russians run away from Kiev and they can be easily defeated, and the same kind of basically behavior of Russians, basically that they would just flee, was expected during the latest counteroffensive in south of Ukraine, which failed totally. And this is, I think, was a shock to many kind of people. But again, it was not surprising if you look into actually what happened before in the case of specifically in case of Kiev, because there was no real possibility of Ukraine defeating Russia, because Russia had a very significant military advantage. And I think now this is a very kind of tough position for Ukraine, because now Russia has no incentive to negotiate with Ukraine, and if Russia would accept any negotiations, I think now conditions for Ukraine would be much more difficult to accept, which would mean loss of territory of Ukraine, including regions which are annexed by Russia. I think now this is a very tough situation, and public admission by this politician, a very senior government official in Ukraine, actually is a sign of such basically such acknowledgement of this, even so he again presented this as a victory for Ukraine, which is quite significant in terms of how this presented to Ukrainian public and also to the West.
Yeah, the whole boosting of the idea that Ukraine can win militarily, that of course serves NATO's desire to fight to the last Ukrainian and try to weaken Russia via Ukraine. The other part of it all, of course, is this business we hear, support. You mentioned it, talked about it, but also the sort of respecting of sovereignty, right? So Boris Johnson can come in and and dictate to Ukrainian officials what agreement to have with Russia, and as you put it, that Ukraine is very much a client state of the West, particularly Washington. And this last week is the 10th anniversary of the beginning of the Maidan protests, which of course played an important role in spurring this horrible war that has now been going on for 20 months or so. And you've done some of the most important work in kind of piecing together what happened, particularly at the latter days of the Maidan protests and the killings. Can you sort of give us a bit of a summary of some of your work in general, but also specifically the results of the court case that have come out in recent weeks?
Yes, I think this is also a very crucial moment in Ukraine, because of 10th anniversary of Maidan is important not only to understand this very important conflict and massacre which took place in Ukraine 10 years ago, but also because this had effect in terms of launching such conflict between Ukraine and Russia, conflict between Russia and the West, and also conflict within Ukraine, which was divided regionally, and there was significant separatism in Donbass and Crimea. So this massacre and this Maidan basically becoming violent and leading to overthrow of relatively Russian government, launched this kind of spiral of conflict, which escalated finally into the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but also there was a civil war in Donbass, Russian military interventions in Donbass, annexation of Crimea by Russia, which is again pro-Russian region, pro-separatist region, another pro-separatist region, and also kind of led to conflict between the Russia and the West in the form of now proxy war, which is between the West and Russia in Ukraine, and Ukraine is used as kind of as a proxy to fight such a war on behalf of the West, in addition to kind of fighting Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think this is also very important to understand. And I published recently, in the last few months, I published 2 peer-reviewed journal articles on the Maidan massacre, which is presented my research, which I again did for 10 years about the Maidan and Maidan massacre. And I also have a book about Maidan massacre accepted for publication by major Western academic press. So it will be published next year based on my research. And in addition to this, there was a revelation, major revelations and major kind of confirmations of research recently from Maidan massacre trial verdicts. So I can say that based on my research, there is overwhelming evidence, and beyond any reasonable doubt, it's possible to say, based on videos and testimonies of absolute majority of wounded Maidan protesters, based on several hundred eyewitnesses, based on forensic, ballistic, and medical examinations by government experts, that there was a false flag massacre of the police and Maidan activists by snipers who were located in the Maidan controlled buildings, specifically Hotel Ukraina, which was controlled by Svoboda, far-right Svoboda party, and they publicly admitted this. They publicly stated before the massacre that they took Hotel Ukraina under their control, and they got and there were snipers there, like videos of Maidan snipers in this hotel. With Kalashnikovs and hunting rifles and so on, shooting into the direction of Maidan protesters and so on. This is, I think, was very important because this was misrepresented in the West as a kind of peaceful overthrow, peaceful, again, revolution, which was democratic overthrow of undemocratic government of Yanukovych. But in practice, this was who ordered this massacre. And my studies found no such evidence that there was any order of the massacre, and I found, basically based on my research, that this massacre was specifically organized to kind of implicate and to put the blame on Yanukovych and the government forces in order to overthrow the Ukrainian government, with alliance, basically by alliance of far right and oligarchic parties in Ukraine. And this is what happened. This, as I mentioned, led to overthrow of Yanukovych government, who fled from Ukraine as a result of being blamed for this massacre, but also as a result of assassination attempts against him. And this is, again, which is almost never mentioned by mainstream media, even so there was evidence and trial evidence about this as well. But I think the recent Maidan massacre trial verdict, which was kind of very important because it was based on a trial which took place in Ukraine since 2015. So I think a very long trial, which I follow and research, and I published my peer-reviewed journal article about the revelations from this Maidan massacre trial and investigation in Ukraine. But there were almost no media reports about these revelations, like a total media blackout in the West, which is quite also unbelievable, because this is like trial of the century in Ukraine, because this is the most important massacre which took place because of its significance in terms of what happened afterwards, and government overthrow in Ukraine, in addition to being major crime and human rights violation. And this verdict, which was again announced by the judge publicly, and later made public on official court database website of Ukrainian justice system, actually revealed evidence again and basically confirmed my studies, my academic studies, that many Maidan protesters were killed from the Hotel Ukraina and other Maidan control locations. And the court specifically stated, and jury stated in their verdict, that this Hotel Ukraina was controlled by the Maidan forces, and they stated also that even BBC journalist was shot and deliberately targeted by shooters from the Hotel Ukraina. And they also said that the 2 rooms which were occupied by German television crews, journalists, during the Maidan massacre in Hotel Ukraina, they were shot at from Maidan controlled territory, specifically conservatory and main post office building, which were controlled by the right sector, far right sector, and a group of snipers who were linked to this far right organization. And so this is quite kind of astonishing to have such revelations. In addition to this, they officially stated and confirmed my research that there was no order or no evidence of any order from Yanukovych or his ministers to massacre Maidan protesters. So, and they said there was no also evidence of any Russian involvement in this massacre. So this is quite significant in terms of basically confirming all this kind of evidence, which was considered and dismissed basically as some kind of conspiracy theory, as Russian disinformation and so on. And even so, again, there was all the information is publicly available, and as I mentioned, supported by testimonies of even absolute majority of wounded Maidan protesters in Ukrainian trial and investigation about Maidan massacre. But this was never reported. Again, there are no, almost with just few exceptions of media in Italy and in the United Kingdom, small media, and in Italy quite popular media, newspaper, but also article which was kind of general article, opinion article. They only mention this revelation. So this is again almost total media blackout about this crucial verdict in Ukraine taking place about the first Maidan massacre. In addition, the trial, they also kind of issued the decision that saying that Berkut police members who were exchanged by Zelenskyy to separatists in the Donbass were responsible or were guilty of the massacre of killing of 31 out of 49 Maidan protesters who were killed, and wounding of 44 out of 100 more than 150 protesters who were wounded during the Maidan massacre. So, and they based this decision entirely on one forensic ballistic examination of bullets, which was conducted 5 years after the massacre, and which basically is very clear. This forensic examination is falsified because it overturned this forensic examination reversed findings of 40 other previous forensic examination bullets by Ukrainian government experts without any explanation, and they also and this forensic examination contradicted kind of synchronized videos which show that Maidan protesters were killed at the times and place when police, Berkut police, were not shooting into that direction or not shooting at all. And this is again, and this verdict, this kind of aspect of the verdict also contradicts testimonies of absolute majority of Maidan protesters who said that they were wounded from Maidan control locations like Hotel Ukraina, or that they witnessed snipers there, and also contradicted by medical forensic examinations showing that the protesters were shot from very steep top to bottom direction and not from the ground area in front of them, which was location of the Berkut police. So this is, I think, and even ballistic experts in Ukraine from the government showed that many protesters were killed from locations like Hotel Ukraina and so on. But this is, I think, it was political aspect of this decision, because these 3 Berkut officers, they were exchanged by Zelenskyy to Donbass separatists, and they were convicted in absentia. So, and 2 other Berkut officers who returned, who were also exchanged but returned to Ukraine, were basically acquitted on charges of the killing of Maidan protesters. So in this case, I think this is, again, a confirmation that this aspect is political, but in this case, that they were charged based on false charges, and even this decision, which convicted kind of in absentia these police officers, Berkut officers, basically admitted also officially that absolute majority of protesters who were wounded and killed during the Maidan massacre were killed by somebody else, not by the Berkut, because they said that they were, according to investigation and according to Maidan massacre trial, there was somebody else who was shooting them. And again, but there is no investigation, nothing. And this was, and there were public denials of any such snipers located in Hotel Ukraina who shot Maidan protesters and from other locations as well. So this is, I think, basic admission that even by the trial, by Ukrainian investigation, that most Maidan protesters were shot from areas which were not controlled by government forces. There was no government forces involvement, and they were basically shot by Maidan snipers as a part of this false flag massacre. So this is quite a significant development, and again, no major media kind of basically media blackout of this crucial story, and this is in contrast to kind of other important stories which happened recently. For instance, this Galician SS division affair in the Ukrainian parliament. But this again, there were, which I also mentioned in my on my Twitter, became again very popular story by the media. But in this case, total kind of media silence, which is also, I think, very revealing in itself.
And it should be noted that Canada very much supported the Maidan protests. We have John Baird very early on. He went to a rally in Maidan Square where Paul Grod, the head of Ukrainian Canadian Congress, said that Canada's then foreign minister was there, effectively supporting the anti-government protests. You had Canada bringing in sanctions. And then Canada, the Canadian embassy was actually taken over by anti-Yanukovych protesters for more than a week, including, as you've uncovered, the C14, one of the far-right organizations. They use the Canadian embassy sort of as a base in their opposition protests. Obviously, that's contrary to the principle of non-intervention in another country's affairs that is supposed to be upheld in the UN Charter. But in the anti-Yanukovych push, some people in Canada have framed it as, well, there was this popular protest and Canada supported the popular protest. But if you actually go back and you look at it, the Canadian government, the Harper government of the day, was very much against Yanukovych right from the get-go, right after he was elected. And Canada actually sent observers. So they said that his election was legitimate, but then they worked very much to undermine him throughout his mandate. And that, of course, just escalated as protests escalated.
And if I can add very briefly, because this is another important point. And initially, again, and there was an important aspect of Maidan, which is that this was popular protest against the Yanukovych government, against the decision to kind of postpone association and free trade agreement with the European Union. But in addition to this, I think more important aspect was violence, and specifically Maidan massacre, post-like Maidan massacre, because this was not peaceful protest which led to overthrow of the Yanukovych government, but specifically this post-like massacre with a movement of far-right organizations, including the ones linked to Svoboda Party, far-right Svoboda Party, and a right sector, and also oligarchic parties like Puzzlement, which became a part of the Ukrainian government after the Maidan massacre. And I think very important as well to kind of to say that this kind of representation of Maidan as a peaceful protest is now officially kind of how to say kind of challenged and officially disproved by a verdict of the Ukrainian trial, Maidan massacre trial, because they specifically said that even so initially there was a peaceful protest on Maidan. During the Maidan massacre, they said there was no. They specifically said there was no peaceful protest. That what happened during the Maidan massacre was they call this armed rebellion and against the police. And specifically, they also confirmed that 4 police officers were killed and 40 were wounded during the Maidan massacre, and this shooting and wounding of police officers started before even any Maidan protesters were killed. And they specifically said this was not peaceful protest, but armed rebellion. I think this is again quite astonishing. There are no media reports, and even you have delegations from Western countries, European Union country, German foreign minister, and Zelenskyy going to the site of this Maidan massacre taking place, and they still kind of say basically blaming Yanukovych forces for this massacre without any reporting about post-war massacre, and this is taking place in the same location where the verdict said specifically protesters were killed, and in the most famous video of the massacre they were killed and this was shown as a massacre from the government forces, but actually the now official trial confirmed my studies that they were shot from Hotel Ukraina in the back, basically. And this is now area of this monument, and all the officials go there, and this is quite unbelievable. This is like Orwell, kind of for me, just to watch this, because I know all this details and all the evidence, but again, nothing is reported, and politicians, Ukrainian politicians and Western politicians pretend that this is like, this is normal, again, and they still kind of do not acknowledge this post-war massacre.
Yeah, and they use the whole Maidan to, I mean, to obviously justify what they're doing, and they claim it was, Russian sponsored Yanukovych that was caused the violence and the like. But so one of the things though today is the commemoration for the Holodomor, the famine in early 1930s, and one of the ways that Stephen Harper, then Canadian Prime Minister, worked to undermine Yanukovych when he visited the country in 2010 is that he went to a monument in Lviv in the west of the country. I guess it was quite controversial. It had just been established, and he sort of really hyped up. It was a commemoration. The museum, I guess, in some ways commemorates the Holodomor, and he hyped it up. And there was a story that at the time that Lubomir Sukic, a Royal Military College Canada professor, who was part of the delegation, the Canadian delegation to Ukraine that traveled with Harper, who was very critical of Yanukovych. At the time, he wrote that basically that he said Yanukovych is slated for the dustbin of history, while the Honorable Harper can stand proud. And he basically suggested that Stephen Harper was the Ukrainian nationalist, and the elected president of Ukraine was not the Ukrainian nationalist. And it got tied into the whole politics around this famine, which apparently the first commemoration for the famine actually takes place in Canada. It's at the Ukrainian Studies at University of Alberta that set that up, I believe, in the early 1980s. So I just wanted to sort of talk about like the politics of I think that everyone agrees that there was a famine and it was quite horrible. But the sort of how it's been used sort of politically to basically suggest that that Stalin or the Russian government was trying to wipe out all Ukrainians, or get into sort of like the idea that it was really with the intent of genocide rather than tied to some very repressive Soviet politics. Yeah, so can you just sort of comment on the Holodomor and how you see the sort of the political context of that history?
Yes, I think I can comment on this because I research both politics of historical memory in Ukraine, including cases of violence like this artificial famine in Ukraine, and also I research specifically the Stalin's policy towards Ukraine, mass media policy towards Ukraine in the 1930s, and I published peer-reviewed journal article on this topic, and have other articles published and book chapters published about this. So I can say, based on my research, that this is a clear case of mass media, that this was artificial famine. It was not just kind of weather-related famine taking place. This was artificial famine, and this was part of the Stalin's policy against not specifically Ukraine. I think this is often is misrepresented for political purposes, but this was part of Stalin's policy based on class collectivization policy in the Soviet Union, based on class criteria. Basically, according to my research and my article, this can be classified as genocide, but not again just as Ukrainians per se, but as genocide against peasants and rich peasants, specifically kulaks in the Soviet Union, and also like other peasants who were considered to be kind of allies of the kulaks because they resisted forced collectivization. And the famine impacted Ukraine specifically because Ukraine was major agricultural area of the Soviet Union, and according to academic research and different scholars, there is now agreement that there were about 3 million people in Ukraine who died, Ukrainian peasants who died as a result of this artificial famine. But in addition to this, there were also about 2 million people who perished in other areas of the Soviet Union, in particular in Kuban area and in Volga area, and also there was a very significant famine in Kazakhstan 2 years before, also kind of as part of such post kind of a policy by the Soviet Union. So in this case, I think there is a clear case of politicization of this artificial famine, and but I think this is also kind of important to understand that this was a real issue, but politics of this again is used to kind of also for the current war. And Zelenskyy today, I think, mentioned that specifically stated that Putin, if he would have power, he would basically repeat the same artificial famine in Ukraine, which is again Holodomor in Ukraine as Stalin did. And I think this is kind of I think this is a political kind of this is just politics of historical memory, and using this tragedy of Ukraine and specifically mass media by Stalin and Soviet government for kind of for political purposes, which is I think even so again many people were kind of impacted by this. But there is another aspect that most of I think all all the famine took place in eastern or kind of in part of the Soviet Ukraine, which was and there was no such famine at that time in Western Ukraine or in the area of Galicia and so on. And so my family came also from from area which is Western Ukraine or now part of Poland as well. And so in this case, there were no such famine then. And this is again, and Ukrainians who came to Canada, most of them came from Western Ukraine again, and they and this is again but Canada was very important kind of in researching this issue, but this also issue was heavily politicized because of politics. Even so, again, the famine has impacted kind of Ukrainians mostly living in the eastern part of Ukraine, again, which were most agricultural area. Now there are areas of the most fighting taking place in Ukraine during this war between Russia and Ukraine.
So thanks a lot for that. Thanks for that historical context. I think we'll leave it there. Yeah, thanks a lot, Professor Katchanovski, for coming on to talking foreign policy.
Yes, thank you.